When people think of Qatar, what often comes to mind are images of opulence, luxury, and a fast-paced modern lifestyle. However, beneath this glittering surface lies a reality that is both controversial and concealed. This nation is frequently accused of showcasing only one side of the coin, while its darker and more contentious issues remain largely hidden from the international audience. One such contentious aspect is the implementation of Sharia law in Qatar. This creates a unique juxtaposition where the seemingly glamorous nightlife often stands in stark contrast to the strict traditional values that are deeply ingrained in the culture. Beneath its sparkling exterior, Qatar holds a more profound and complex narrative that deserves closer scrutiny. If you think this lively party scene is somewhere in Europe, think again. This is the nightlife of Qatar. Despite its strong Islamic cultural background, Qatar is far from being closed off to the vibrant pulse of nightlife. It's essential to understand that Qatar's nightlife is primarily concentrated in Doha, the capital city. Doha is home to numerous nightclubs and bars, most of which are located in or around international hotels. While bars are permitted, not all serve alcoholic beverages. Only licensed establishments are allowed to sell alcohol. Despite this, consuming alcohol in public or being publicly intoxicated is strictly prohibited. Another facet of Qatar that often diverges from its stringent Islamic traditions is its approach to dress codes. In Qatar and many other Arab countries, wearing the hijab or even the burqa is the norm, and authorities are known to penalize women who dress inappropriately. However, in Qatar, you can wear a bikini at the beach, though there are specific guidelines to follow. Bikinis are commonplace in Qatar, but are generally restricted to private pools and resort areas. When not in the water or at public beaches, it is expected that you wear modest and loose clothing. Therefore, if you plan to wear a bikini, it's best to choose hotels with private beach access. In Doha, most beaches are only accessible through hotels. Beyond the nightlife and dress code, Qatar faces a much graver issue: human rights violations. It's widely known that Qatar relies heavily on migrant workers, predominantly from South Asia, countries like India, Nepal, and Bangladesh, and Africa. These workers flock to Qatar, lured by the promise of high wages in one of the world's wealthiest nations. Take, for instance, the preparations for the World Cup. Around 1.5 million migrant workers arrived in Qatar, hoping for decent employment opportunities. However, the reality on the ground is far from the idyllic expectations. The conditions for migrant workers, especially those in construction, are deplorable. Most of these laborers are uneducated, making them vulnerable to exploitation. Companies often take advantage of their lack of bargaining power, assigning them tasks outside their skill sets, such as untrained electricians. Wages are another significant issue. Migrant workers are paid meager salaries, significantly less than their Arab counterparts. They work long hours in extreme heat, often without breaks or days off. Their living conditions are equally dire, with many relegated to overcrowded and unsanitary slums, creating a stark contrast to Qatar's gleaming urban landscape. Even if workers wish to voice their grievances, they face numerous obstacles. The Qatari government does not permit migrant workers to join or form unions, a right reserved only for Qatari citizens. Additionally, migrant workers must surrender their passports upon arrival, trapping them in their jobs with no means of escape. This system effectively turns them into prisoners, forced to work under harsh conditions. Authorities continue to restrict freedoms, silencing critical voices and stifling any attempts at protest. Migrant workers endure numerous abuses, including wage theft, forced labor, and exploitation, with little to no access to adequate complaint mechanisms or remedies. Even when such mechanisms exist, migrant workers encounter significant barriers to justice and reparation for the abuses they suffer. The plight of domestic workers, most of whom are women, is similarly dire. Living with their employers, these women often face harsh working conditions and abuse. They are subject to discrimination, both in law and practice, perpetuating a cycle of vulnerability and mistreatment. The 2022 FIFA World Cup, hosted by Qatar, was a monumental event shrouded in controversy. Allegations of bribery surfaced, suggesting that Qatar secured the hosting rights through corrupt practices involving members of FIFA's Executive Committee. Despite these claims, Qatari officials vehemently deny any wrongdoing, dismissing the accusations as jealousy and distrust from the international community. While Qatar is often reported to have relatively low corruption levels by regional standards, this statistic requires closer scrutiny. The country's low corruption index can be attributed to its strong patronage networks, deeply rooted in the royal family. These networks control information and national resources with minimal transparency and accountability. In Qatar, the royal family wields significant influence over the nation's wealth. The political system lacks robust checks and balances capable of overseeing the actions of the country's leaders. Power is heavily concentrated in the hands of the emir, with the ruling family monopolizing key policy areas and important governmental positions. This concentration of power leads to non-transparent budgeting processes, allowing the elite to allocate state revenue arbitrarily, thus increasing the risk of corruption. In recent years, the Qatari government has introduced laws aimed at addressing existing disparities and enhancing governance. These efforts include improving public procurement practices, strengthening anti-money laundering frameworks, and pledging to reform the sponsorship system known as kafala. Despite these measures, significant challenges remain. Few steps have been taken to curtail expenditure driven by personal interests. Another pressing issue is that the national integrity system does not operate independently of political interests, undermining its effectiveness. In terms of diplomatic relations, Qatar has a unique and sometimes controversial stance. The country has leveraged its extensive diplomatic ties, including relationships with militant groups such as Hamas and the Taliban, as well as with nations like Russia, often seen as adversaries by the United States. This strategic diplomacy has led to significant tension with its Gulf neighbors, particularly Saudi Arabia and its allies, who accuse Qatar of sponsoring extremist groups that destabilize the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, in particular, views Qatar's connections with groups like the Taliban and various al-Qaeda affiliates with deep suspicion. Moreover, Qatar has been accused of supporting the Houthi rebels in Yemen, who are fighting against the Saudi and UAE-backed government forces. For years, Qatar, a long-standing ally of the United States, has been openly accused of funding Hamas and supporting extremist groups operating in Syria. These diplomatic efforts are often seen as part of Qatar's soft power, initiatives designed to enhance its global standing and distinguish itself from regional rivals. Despite these allegations, the Qatari emirs firmly deny Riyadh's accusations. They assert that Qatar has implemented stronger anti-terrorism measures than some of its neighboring countries. These claims of robust counter-terrorism efforts are a crucial part of Qatar's defense against the criticisms leveled by its Gulf counterparts. An interesting and highly debated topic is Qatar's hosting of the World Cup. Beyond allegations of bribery, many argue that Qatar is not an ideal country to host this global event. Like other Islamic nations in the Middle East, Qatar bases its laws primarily on Sharia, which often clashes with the more liberal and secular trends associated with the World Cup. Qatar's judicial system, rooted in Islamic law, has faced criticism from Western nations for its perceived bias towards prosecutors and police. While Qatar strives to present itself as a foreigner-friendly nation, traditional Islamic values remain deeply entrenched. This autocratic country has pledged unprecedented leniency in its policies to accommodate the influx of tourists for the World Cup. However, fans attending the event must still adhere to Qatar's strict laws and customs, including regulations concerning alcohol, drugs, sexuality, and dress codes. Qatar is fundamentally a conservative country with strict laws and customs. Foreign tourists might find it challenging to adapt to local cultural norms, especially concerning dress codes, public behavior, and certain restricted activities. The legal system in Qatar is based on Islamic law, which can limit personal freedoms in areas such as freedom of speech, expression, and religion. Criticizing the government or the ruling family can lead to severe consequences. Qatar has faced significant criticism over its treatment of migrant workers, who constitute a large portion of its population. Reports of poor working conditions, low wages, and human rights violations have raised serious concerns about the well-being of these workers. The preparation for the World Cup has brought these issues to the forefront, with numerous accounts of labor abuses and inadequate living conditions making international headlines. Qatar's hosting of the World Cup shines a spotlight on the intersection of tradition and modernity in a rapidly evolving nation. The ethical and legal challenges posed by its adherence to Sharia law, coupled with its efforts to accommodate international visitors, underscore the complexities of balancing cultural values with global expectations. Understanding these issues provides a deeper insight into the social and legal fabric of Qatar as it navigates its role on the world stage.